This is always a bit. Okay. Preview coming in, waiting for Instagram. Having a sip of coffee. There we are. We're live in officially all the places. Okay. Good morning, Kristin Mathis. I can say morning because it's morning for both of us. Just later morning.
Good morning, Vivi. It's so good to see you again on this day that's not at all loaded with portent.
You know what? I was thinking about this because like last week, I was already in an eclipse hole. I literally forgot. I can't speak. I was in Detroit. Like time zones, days. I lost all of it. I get a text from KristaLyn like, "Where's the link?" And I'm like, "I'm so sorry." I'm somewhere else. So I didn't want to not do that this week. But then I was thinking like, because KristaLyn's out, looking at the eclipse somewhere. They traveled, and I was like, I'll just talk to Kristin. This will be nice. This feels like proper like eclipse protocol, like catching up with someone who's wise. We're gonna have like a nice conversation.
That's a lot. No pressure to be wise.
No.
I'll take old. Old I can do. Wise is maybe a stretch.
I mean, well, what I'm saying is that we are talking about sacred matters where there's a serious tone here.
Yeah. Sure. But the Greeks seriousness and humor and all that went together. And sexiness went together. You didn't have to choose. So we're doing both and here, which is very Orphic.
I love it. It's funny. I've been I want to talk about the eclipses because there's an eclipse today.
Yeah.
But I also have been thinking about, like, I've been wanting to talk to you anyway, because I've been really just like obsessed with the mythology of Mars and Venus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And these eclipses obviously taking place in their signs. But yeah, where should we start first? You've done a lot of recordings on your thoughts on the eclipses, but
yeah. Well, I mean, I can just sort of restate it here, which is that there are lots of different traditions about eclipses, and I feel like I want to just lead with a caveat that if you come from a background or a lineage that has specific eclipse protocols, by all means observe them.
Yeah.
This is no shade or this is something very personal, and it differs from lineage to lineage, geographical regions, even individual families sometimes carry traditions around eclipses.
Yeah.
I'm thinking in my building, I live in Brooklyn. My building is very Uzbek and Russian.
Okay.
And most of the Uzbek families in the building do not go outside to watch eclipses. There's a lot of incense burning that happens in my building. And so if you're coming from a tradition like that, by all means, observe it. That said, I feel like there's, every time there's an eclipse, we see a bunch of astro memes about the baleful rays and how you shouldn't be underneath the baleful rays. And I want to offer just a slightly different perspective on that, because while that certainly is one tradition within astrology, let's say, as a whole, we also, the fact of the matter is that we have extensive records about eclipses going as far back as Mesopotamia, Egypt, Greece, and from those records, we know that at least some astrologers were observing the eclipses to see what did it look like, what direction did the winds come from, what color was the sun, was there a full darkening, what sorts of animals did or didn't make noises. All these things were observed very closely and written down by people whose job it was to do those things, namely the temple priests, and sometimes they're called astrologues, sometimes they're called hour watchers,
Okay.
sometimes they're given other titles depending what part of the ancient Mediterranean they're from. But we only have all these records because there were folks observing them. So I guess I wanted to, I like to frame eclipses in terms of an animist belief in the living divine body of the cosmos and our own position as humans, and perhaps particularly as either astrologers or worshipers of the divine cosmos, or eco-spiritualists, if that's a word. Maybe frame it more as a question for oneself, like, what am I being called in my relationship to these divine celestial bodies? What am I being called to do? So it's not a rule, it's a conversation with the cosmos, right? And if my job, I'll just speak personally, right? I have a very personal relationship with a solar deity.
Yeah.
And I feel like very strongly in my personal devotion and conversation with her, and just way of relating to her, that I want to be there with her when this happens. And I want to observe it, and I want to perhaps make art about it. That feels incredibly sacred to me, in my own personal relationship.
Sure.
And I don't think there's anything wrong if somebody else had a completely different answer, where they, in their personal relationship, it felt like keeping silence or staying indoors or whatever was more important. Okay.
So yeah. I'm hearing this, and it feels like there's a core principle of what you're talking about is connection and choice.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm
Exactly.
thinking about people who I know who are coming at this from maybe a like Indian perspective, like they're studying Indian astrology, Vedic astrology, and they are doing like mantra today, and there's certain protocols, and there's like they're definitely indoors, but that act is a way of connecting, right? Not, I wouldn't say like I'm not saying connecting as if they're like doing magic and actually trying to connect, but it's a way of being present and understanding, and it's a viewpoint, whereas maybe someone who, like yourself, is going out and saying, this is part of my practice. Actually, I want to be here with my solar deity. That's also a different way to connect.
Yeah. And I think there's, I also want to make a very sort of like using a fine-tooth comb within traditions, right? In order for Vedic astrology to even predict when eclipses happened, and what sorts of things result from them. At some point, people were observing them, right? So then there's also a question of like, what's your role specifically within the community, let's say, right? So we don't have tons of evidence from the ancient Mediterranean, but we have enough to know that that it wasn't just there was one type of astrologer, right? Or one type of astral observer. Within, let's say, Egyptian temples or Mesopotamian temples, you had people in charge of spotting the heliacal rising of the stars, right? You had people who were in charge of more sort of like record keeping and writing things down. You had people in charge of interpreting omens. So it's entirely possible in a tradition that there's a general blanket, like, hey, this is maybe not such a good time to start
Yeah.
new things, or maybe most people should stay indoors. But then, even within that, there would be a specific subset of people whose job it was, sacred, holy task it was, to observe and record. So that's another way of framing the question, right? Like, am I that person? I mean,
Yeah.
not am I that person, like there's only one of them, but is that my relationship? Am I a timekeeper? Am I a sky observer? And if I am, then maybe that's my sacred duty. And it's maybe not for somebody else who's also an astrologer.
Yeah,
You know what
yeah,
I mean?
yeah, yeah. It the biggest thing that's coming up for me as you're saying all this is that, right? Like, I think so much of the don't look at the baleful rays,
Hmm.
it's coming from, like Instagram, like pop culture, right?
Right.
Like, I mean, there is a, earnest debate among astrologers and magic practitioners that's
Hmm.
quite nerdy and important. But like, I also just think there's something about this, like, how you're reacting to the eclipse, right? That sort of mirrors the fear. The
Yeah.
fear around this eclipse, I think, is so palpable because I think there's an actual just like fear in the world right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's something
Totally.
about, like, I think on some level, and I'm not talking about people who, again, are like have rituals or,
Hmm.
but I
Yeah.
think there's something about a little bit of like, well, if I stay in and if I'm quiet, maybe it like maybe
Yeah.
the world won't be so scary. And I
Right.
also just
Maybe.
think,
Yeah.
but I also think there's something about this moment, right? And not saying like, go look at the eclipse, that we really just like can't look away from right now.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
maybe that's why your thing is so important. There's something right now that we just can't, whether it's like, the sort of human like genocide or
Right.
environmental disaster, right? There's something that we can't look
Yeah.
away from at this moment.
Totally. And I think that, the question is like how to be, there's many, many, many ways to bring peace, holiness,
Yeah.
a sense of the sacred, a sense of connection, to the divine and to each other and to the cosmos, because it's all ultimately the same thing, right? Um, there's so many different ways of doing that. So the, sometimes there's also very practical
Mhm.
considerations, right? Like, I happen to be in a location that is, not in the direct totality path, but very, very close to it. This
Yeah.
is a beautiful opportunity that I may not have again, um, in my lifetime in the same way. I have a child who I want to, I mean, he's a big galoot of a child, but I have a teenager that I'm responsible for that, I want to help imbue with the mystery of the cosmos.
Yeah.
I want to participate in that with him. Um, I have a prime viewing location. I and from this terrace where I'm sitting right now, I observe the other stars all the time. Like, this is a big part of my personal practice is looking at the alignments of the stars and the sun and the moon. Um, so for me, all these things taken together add up to I'm going to, um, I'm going to view it because that's what I'm being called to do. And I think that is, you know, putting all those different things together
Yeah.
in factoring in your decision is, uh, I think, for people who don't come from a specific lineage with specific traditions, that type of choice in and of itself is a sacred act of like weighing out and sort of engaging with your relationship with with the divine and with the celestial bodies. So
Y- You know,
yeah.
yeah. I mean, to view it, to not to view it, right? These are
Mm-hmm.
decisions. But I think the bigger question for me is, well, I'm curious to know, right? Just your thoughts about, I don't know if you said a lot, thought about this eclipse from a mundane aspect, what your thoughts
Mm-hmm.
are on like sort of the symbolism of this eclipse in the greater,
Yeah.
in the world implications. And then also the second part of that is, right, was there like a, I don't want to say like eclipse integration protocol for the ancients, right? Were there things that you did leading up to the eclipse, and then like after the eclipse, was it like, okay, the world has changed, or was it just this thing, this natural phenomenon, we watched it, we moved on in our lives?
Yeah.
Yeah, all of that.
It's
really
I think, okay, I'm going to go backwards. I'm going to answer
sure,
the first one first
please.
and then get to the second. So the short answer for your second question is we don't know. That we actually have very little evidence from certainly the Greek texts, but even Egyptian and Mesopotamian, as far as I'm aware, of specific protocols. We have um, we have a lot of written evidence of records, so we know that they did observe these things.
Yeah.
We know we have the tools in some cases that they used for observation. We have references to, for instance, how both artistic and literary or written references to how, let's say, the Egyptian priests who sat on the roofs of temples cited the stars and took their records.
Yeah.
But we don't have a lot of references to the ritual that would have surrounded it. But I think it's safe to say that there probably would have been ritual because these um, these observers were usually temple priests or priestesses um, operating in the context of a sacred environment. One would assume that there were specific rituals, um, but we don't know a lot about that. So I think that's one in the absence of having specific rituals. I think that it's that's sort of more of a call to those of us who are working within that tradition to double down on our own relationship and what our own sort of usual practices are, and um, be creative, but like really lean into one's relationship with the deities, with the celestial bodies. I'm just thinking for myself, and maybe this segues into your first question. The fact that, there's a lot happening in Aries right now, and we, generally speaking, in the world have a lot of fiery energy happening, which is, I think, related to the fear that you're naming. Aries is associated with Phobos, with terror, and with battle, like the rout of battle, like that terror that comes, that both gives you the adrenaline to rush into battle, but also what happens when the tide of a battle turns and then the enemy just like is terrorized and flees, right? That type of visceral terror is very much associated with Aries, the god.
Yeah.
So one of the best remediations for Aries is either Aphrodite or Dionysus, which is or Zeus, Jupiter, or the moon. And if I were going to choose, I mean, any of those is a good way to divert Aries energy. And I feel like the background here is that I've done some work on this, and you can read about it on my Substack on the Orphic Hymn to Aries and why those specific remediations are appropriate. But certainly love and Aphrodite and union and relationship is one way to soften that fear. Dionysus is, or the liberator, is sort of the keeping things loose and maybe at some points in time that is a good way to use your Aries energy, right? It's just to like get out there on the dance floor, dance it out.
I love that. I love that, like, dance remediation.
Yeah.
It almost seems like during these, like, I don't know, maybe it's because I'm like sensitive or something. I'm like going on social media and I'm like, everyone's like, eclipse, like, hi, don't hide, like, what, or this is the big time to man up, whatever. Like, it's just like everyone has like a big, this is what to do, this is happening. And like, I'm remembering like why, like, I remember when I first discovered like astrological magic. That sounds so silly, but it was such like a game changer. I was like, oh wait, like astrology isn't just like waiting for like bad shit to happen. Like there's a way to actually be in relationship with the universe and like think about it. And I think that's where I'm coming from with this eclipse. It's like, whether, you're mindfully choosing to watch it or you're not choosing to watch it because you have a reason. I think, what this is bringing out is that so many people, I'm not even talking about astrologers, have no relationship to the natural world. I mean, I'm not going to say I have a big one. And there's just like all of this fear, like we're going to wait. And then like, then what? But I love the conversation at the end of it. It's like, okay, like, I think maybe my question to you is like, or in general, it should be like, remediation for the eclipse times.
Yeah, right. The eclipse times. I love that phrase, right? Like, the eclipse times. We're in like, hello, we're in the apocalypse, or it feels like we're in the apocalypse. But when you're faced with that type of like, terror, that overwhelming terror, like everybody's in the sign of Aries right now. And so because the sign of Aries is ruled by Mars / Aries, the god, that sense of terror is palpable. So you can fuck it off, with Aphrodite, or I'm being slightly snarky there, but like,
but also not
silly, but also not, right? But you can use that energy for things that require stamina. So you can use it for lovemaking and union and togetherness. You can use it to power your ritual in dance or in intense acts of devotion. Or you could invite someone like the moon in, which might be particularly appropriate since it's an eclipse. And it is, in fact, the moon is involved in that eclipse anyway. And the moon has a soothing, moistening, I've talked elsewhere about like sort of a nanny effect on Mars, right? Like a nanny helping to redirect the energetic, wayward toddler. And that's sort of the energy that we need right now. I mean, I guess I tend to personally, during this eclipse, that's what I've been feeling drawn to. That I've just been feeling like I want the moon to sort of step in and give everybody a bath and like calm them, calm them down and get them ready for bed.
Totally. And I to clarify, when I say like eclipse times, I'm not necessarily talking about just like today, but I guess my thought is that like like we are in a period of time, like, hold the eclipse sacred in whatever way it feels good to you. I'm not just for people, I'm not suggesting we all go fuck on the eclipse, but I'm talking about like what happens after and the day after that, because like the eclipse I think is like marking this really chaotic period, and there's something much bigger here, and that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah, but I think that you sort of can't go wrong with those 3 points of
Yeah.
remediation,
Yeah.
right? Like unity and unifying and love. I mean,
Mhm.
let's just phrase them in the most sort of positive and
Yes.
broadest way possible,
Yeah.
right? So love, devotion, and s- I want to say like soothing, sort
Ooh.
of firm, soothing quality. I always go back to how Kira, um, God, I'm blanking on their last name right now, but Kira,
Sutherland? That
yeah,
one? Sutherland?
yeah, and Kira mentioned, uh, after I wrote about the
Mhm.
moon's sort of nannying effect on
Yeah.
Mars, she said, she said, "I'm gonna go moon nanny their ass." And that's now like she was talking about somebody who was having like a martial effect in her life, and I always think about that verb now, to moon nanny somebody means like to hold a firm boundary in a loving and soothing way, but like there's no, you're not going to permit any shenanigans to happen on your watch, you
Moon
know
nanny.
um, and I feel like, yeah, in these eclipse times, we really can't go wrong when we experience that overwhelming fear, or we sense that someone else or the environment around us is experiencing that fear. How do we lean into love? How do we lean into devotion? And how do we bring that sort of moon nanny vibe to any given situation?
Yeah. The moon nanny vibe. I love that. Do you have a few more minutes? I have one last question or
Yeah,
tell your
yeah,
your
yeah,
time.
yeah.
Okay. Um, I know you have a relationship to the sun. If we could talk about the sun for a
Hmm.
moment. I was just thinking about how wild it is. I mean, everyone's talking about that this eclipse is happening with Chiron, which is
Hmm.
remarkable. Um, but also, like I was really thinking about this last night, and like I woke up thinking about this last night that this eclipse is happening at the exaltation degree of the sun, right? So you have right, like I'm
Hmm.
just wow, that is just the sun at its peak being obscured, and I just
Hmm.
wondering if you have some thoughts around that.
My main thoughts is that it's hitting me in my physical body in a
Oh God,
really
me
intense way,
too.
because it just happens to be on, like, my Chiron is right there. I mean, I like this eclipse is happening like in my body. I mean, for those who don't know, I got COVID again last week. I mean, I already have long COVID, so I'm coming out of that, and yeah, more generally, um, I think that there's
Stage in the sun.
yeah, the sun, I mean, I guess for me, it feels like there's a, you've already said this. We're at this point where it feels like there's a really big shift occurring,
Mhm.
um, for humanity. And, folks are talking about it in lots of different ways, everything from, um, the different wars that are happening right now to the advent of AI and what that means for humanity, climate crisis. The fact that the sun is being exalted and obscured at the
Mhm.
same time, I feel like that says it all, right? I mean, that's like we're on the verge, like we're both at a really potentially exciting turning point,
Yeah.
and this like completely like feeling our way through the darkness in terror, in abject terror, right? But the exaltation is there, right? The potential is there. It's
Yeah.
not um it's not that the sun isn't being exalted in that degree, right? That it's still, I mean, if this is your tradition,
Yeah.
it's still happening. So like how do we access that, or how do we live in the both and, which is a very Orphic thing to do.
I love that so much. And I've been really framing my thoughts around this
Mm-hmm.
eclipse around a particular myth. Could
Mm-hmm.
I share it with you? And
Yeah,
I know
yeah, of
you
course.
have some really great ways of telling me more than I know about this myth.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm looking at the comments here and I'm seeing the Devon saying the moon upstaging the sun, right? And that's what makes me
Mm-hmm.
think of this. And I'm also thinking about some background. You mentioned dance party earlier, right? Which is
Uh-huh.
going. So I was, I've been chewing on for a bit here, and anyone who's listened to me knows this, like everyone I know. The story of I'm not realizing I'm not speaking to my mic. The story of Venus and Mars getting caught in the net.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I've been
Mm-hmm.
like thinking about that story and thinking about the story. So essentially, um, actually, you know what? I've told the story 1,000 times. Maybe I'm gonna like just bare bones give my thoughts on it. And would you mind sharing the story? Because I'm sure you have a really great way of framing this.
Okay, I can. Yes, but
Yeah.
you also leap in because I'm not sure when I tell it if I'll hit the points that really strike you.
So maybe
So,
okay, maybe then I'll go do a bare.
uh-huh.
I'm gonna do the bare bones. You can jump in. Okay. So essentially, for those who don't know the story, Venus, and for maybe reasons Kristen will tell us, is essentially more forced to marry Hephaestus. That's how I pronounce it. But how do you pronounce it?
Mm-hmm. Hephaestus. Mm-hmm.
Hephaestus. Okay. So, Venus, and for those who don't know astrology, Venus and Mars, or we say guardians of the night sect, right? So they are on the team moon. Just that's important to remember. So, okay. So Venus and Hephaestus, Venus does not like into Hephaestus, was like forced to marry him, but essentially like loves Mars. So every day when Hephaestus goes to work, Venus and Mars just fuck in Venus's bed. And one day Hephaestus figures this out because the sun tattles on them. And
Mm-hmm.
and Hephaestus is like, great, like I'm gonna like make a net and catch these two. And so he does, and he does. So they're caught in this net, which is interesting, thinking about the members of the night sect being caught, tattled on by the sun, caught in the light of day, fucking, doing very like nighttime activities, and they're sort of subjected to Mount Olympus, just like shows up at their bed, like laughing at them, and Mercury makes this like
Mm-hmm.
snide comment. And I've been thinking about this a lot, and talking to my mentor Larry Arrington about this idea of like, this is sort of what happens when the night is subjected to like the laws of the day. And
Mm-hmm.
I've really been thinking about that story with this eclipse, and now I
Mm.
in.
Yeah, that's so interesting. There's a lot to mull over there. And I think one of the things that um one of the things that I always find, God, there's like, my brain is going a million ways at once. Um, so yeah, Hephaestus is a is someone who I've been thinking about a lot lately.
Okay.
Partly because I'm in a group that does sort of myth and storytelling and theory reading around the issue of disability and crip theory.
Okay.
Um, and as somebody who has a chronic illness and is like becoming more disabled in these past few years, um, yeah, the figure of Hephaestus always interests me because he is sometimes associated with, he's clearly like on the one hand, a counterpoint to Aries,
Hmm.
right? They both work with have fiery energy, but Hephaestus crafts and makes objects of beauty, including the golden net, which he casts over Aries and Mars. I mean, Aries and Venus.
Yes.
Um, but um, he's crippled, and he's cast out by his own mother, Hera, and he's this figure of ridicule on
Hmm.
Olympus. And everybody thinks it's a big joke that he's married to Aphrodite, including Aphrodite. Right? You're right. She's forced to marry him. She's forced to marry this quote unquote cripple.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, Aries, the, studly warrior that he is much more interesting to her. And matches her energy in a way that, at least outwardly, Hephaestus doesn't.
Okay.
But so there's a few things here. One is that there's another way in which Venus is perfectly matched with Hephaestus, because Hephaestus makes objects of great beauty and creativity. He makes these gorgeous robot-like figures in other myths. He can make beautiful weapons and armor. He makes this intricate golden net. So there is an affinity there that maybe isn't as obvious. And so when I think about Hephaestus coming over and casting this intricately woven, beautiful net over them, and then the two sort of most beautiful, most studly deities in the Olympic pantheon being subjected to ridicule, right? They've been caught, and despite most of the gods philandering, right? It's not like
really you're judging,
right? But the idea is that you're right, that they're out of context, right? These things that are supposed to be kept secret or supposed to happen in the night are exposed, and they're entangled. They're all like tangled up together. They can't get out of this net. And the shame is reversed, right? So Hephaestus's shame of being cuckolded, of being crippled, of being less than, is reversed. And there's something. These myths are often, I want to say they're, Greek myths are often disturbing, right? On a very, when we take them at first glance, there's so much in them that is just messed up, right? Like, she's cheating. Hephaestus is rejected, is cast out of heaven because he's disabled. I mean, and then the whole like sort of slut shaming that's happening with like, there's a lot in there to dislike, but there's also a lot in there, I think, to just sort of ruminate on and think about, like, what, as I love that you're bringing this myth to the eclipse, because maybe one thing to ponder with this myth is like, what that has been cast out or shamed is now being ready to take center stage, and what that we normally think of as beautiful, what that we hold up in society as values, is ready to be poked fun at, what should we be ashamed of, we meaning as humanity? Like, what have we accepted as beautiful or worthy or okay, that maybe needs to have a net thrown over it and have people be like, really? That? And which people who have been abject and subject and cast aside in their whether it's their literal or figurative darkness, or their disability, or their downcastness in some way, which of those people are stepping forward and showing us something that we don't want to see? And that we could take that on any level, from the very personal to the world stage to cosmically.
could we think of it as like a reverse nat, right? Like, so in this particular story, we say night being caught up in the golden light of day, but in this particular eclipse, we see that the moon is upstaging the sun. Could we think of what it means when the the solar deities are caught in the silver net of night? Did I lose you? Okay, Kristen froze. Let's see if that's Kristen texting me. This is so wild. Thank you everyone who is listening to this. I'm going to check my text messages to see if Kristen is in fact texting me. I lost you. What a funny moment to lose her. Okay. Well, I'm going to stay on and see if Kristen writes me back. Okay, Devin. So Devin says, so what would we catch? Saturn. Ooh, good point. Okay, Kristen's hopping back on, so I don't have to answer that question. Thanks to everyone who's joined. Does anyone have any questions? If you're watching on IG Live, you can and Jupiter doing by the moon. Yeah. If you're watching this on IG Live, you can head over to YouTube and watch it, or the Zodiac, and you can comment and ask questions from Kristen, who is hopefully about to rejoin us any moment. I'm still here, Kristen. And good morning. It's funny. Kristen's like out on,
Hey,
her terrace.
hey,
Hi.
sorry, I just came back inside in case that was the problem. So
It
we have
was such a
comment right
funny
here.
moment. I'm like, and the golden net of the silver net of the moon, silver net of the moon, and you just disappeared.
Oh, sorry. um, yeah, so okay.
We
Yeah.
Yeah, so I love okay, so I'm just gonna see if I can synthesize what you said, right? So thinking about this idea of maybe it is a moment to think about what we're being shown in sort of ways of reversals, like who has been
Mhm.
cast out that is maybe um whose voice we need to be listening to right now.
Mhm.
Um
Yeah.
and oh, go on.
Well, no, and just I love when you framed it before in terms of the night sect and the day sect and these different rules, um it's not like the night sect is better or the day sect is
Sure.
better, but that they mirror each other and offer different types of opportunities, and maybe I love that your intuition led you to this particular story at this particular time, because it does feel very timely.
It's interesting. You mentioned like AI right now that I'm
Mhm.
sort of the sparks are slowly sparking. Um, this idea, we think of like the night sect and night consciousness, right? I think Jason Holly always says that, and I really love the way he
Mhm.
thinks about sect. But we could think of like creativity and like the imagination and intuition and all these sort of nighttime
Mhm.
things. And solar, we say like logic, right? Like,
Mhm.
and I'm even thinking about like AI, right? We're at this, like you mentioned, that at this like sort of peak solar sun at its exaltation, like we have all this power to do these things, but it's thinking
Mhm.
about the moon upstaging is like, okay, but what is this technology if we don't bring our night consciousness to it, if we don't bring our
Right.
sense of connection and creativity
Yes.
and intuition? It's like the sun
And
needs to
embodiment.
be checked. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
mm,
and embodiment, right? Like our feeling and our we can't just we can't just exist as disembodied um solar head beings, And I mean, for me, the sun is also very embodied, but that's not necessarily um how we're experiencing power these in our in the dominant culture, right? Power and particularly that sort of monarchical, kingly, queenly power is often in the dominant culture disembodied from a true sense of being like somaticism and relationship to the earth, relationship to the cosmos. So what would it mean to bring, not just to moon nanny, but to bring the moon's concern with nourishment and nurturing and embodiment into the picture?
Yeah. What before we go, do you speak openly about your sun deity practice or like who you work with?
Yeah, I can. I I think I've talked about this. I I think before, but I have a very special relationship with the Egyptian goddess Sekhmet,
Okay.
who chose me. I did not know she existed many years ago, and when I was in my 20s, and I my relationship with her is constantly evolving and has morphed. It's been close to 25 years since
Wow.
she first grabbed my attention in a very dramatic way at the Met Museum.
Mm.
And so during that time, especially at first, I went, well, yeah, at first I just did a lot of study about
Mhm.
her. In my 30s, I went through, and early 40s, I went through a phase of really like trying to track all the heliacal risings of stars and things like that, because that felt like that was part of what she was calling me to do. And these days, my devotional practice with her is very simple.
Yeah.
Um, it's really just connecting with her on a very heart level. I She's the one. I mean, I might cry when I talk about this, but she's the one who I just know that when I die, she's where I'm going.
Yeah.
I don't ask, that doesn't necessarily completely uh, overlap with my Orphic stuff that I do.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, there are some really interesting historical connections there that I could nerd out about one day, but like, um, but just on a heart level, every time I've been in a sort of near death type situation, she's the one who's there. I know she's where I'm going to, and it's very easy for me these days to just connect in with her at any given moment and know what she wants me to do. Um, I think that's the type of thing that, at least for me,
Yeah.
um, has become, I don't want to say easier over time, because even when I was young, it was because she chose me, like literally like called my name as I walked by one of her statues in the Met. And I had to turn around, and I thought somebody was addressing me. And I've since met one other person who had that same experience with the same statue.
Wow.
Um, yeah,
Wow.
it's really interesting. Yeah.
Can
Uh-huh.
for
Go ahead.
for those who don't know who Sekhmet is, could
Oh
you just
yeah.
give a quick
Yeah. Sekhmet, you might recognize her because she's the one who, um, she's the lioness deity. She
mhm.
has the body of a woman. She has the face of a lioness, and she wears a solar disc on her head.
Mm.
Um, Her temples were related to timekeeping and calendrical astral observance and solar observance in Egypt. Um, And there are a lot of statues of her because her temple in I want to say her temple in Memphis was had 365 different statues of her, one for each day of the solar year. So they've wound up in museums all over the world. There's one in the museum in Brooklyn. There's a bunch in the Museum of the Met. But if you go to any major Egyptian collection, chances are you can see a Sekhmet statue.
Yeah.
And she was associated not just with the sun, but with healing. Her priests, there were a set of priests in her temple that were responsible for what we would call like medical techniques, right? Like they were physicians. And people think there's a historical relationship perhaps with Apollo, because like the Greek Apollo, Sekhmet, who we have records of, way, way back, Sekhmet both can send plague and relieve plague. In popular like wiki fandom anime culture, Sekhmet is this like horrible bloodthirsty goddess, and there's myths in Egypt around Sekhmet sending plague and then needing to be assuaged by being given by being tricked into drinking beer that has been dyed red like blood. So she thinks she's drinking blood, but then she gets really drunk and passes out, and the danger goes away. Some people think that is itself an eclipse myth, right? Where there's this like sort of bad luck or plague energy, and then the redness, and then the sort of release and return to normal. Other people think it has to do with seasonal plagues in Egypt around the desert heat. I experienced both her ferocity and her I also experience a lot of strong maternal energy from her as well. So it's like a both and for me. But I think that this, like, if you Google her, you get a lot of like sexy cat demon goddess anime stuff, and that's not how I experience her. But I experience her as very warm, like she in my inner, like in my meditative life, she's a lioness. She purrs, she licks you, she will cuddle you and surround you, but you don't ever forget that she's a lioness. You know?
Such as a lioness.
Yeah.
Devin has a really great comment here. I wonder if you can speak to. Sekhmet is holding an Ankh. Is she ever associated with the Venus star? I've read that the Ankh is an early version of the Venus glyph.
That's really interesting. I have not seen that.
Okay.
But that said, I am not an Egyptologist, and I've sort of she's certainly associated with Sothis, with the star Sirius, right? Because that at the time, due to the precession of the equinoxes, at the time, high summer coincided with Sirius rising in Egypt, and so the heat of the summer and the heat of like midsummer was associated with Sirius, the dog star, and also the flooding of the Nile that relieved that heat. I have not seen a direct connection to Venus, but that would be a really interesting little rabbit hole to go down. I'm going to say thank you, Devin, for that little clue or tidbit, and I will follow it up.
I also just love having this Sekhmet story to process the eclipse,
Mm-hmm.
right? Thinking about like, I don't know, like, because it's, I think, maybe as another reframe here, right?
Mm-hmm.
The sort of um feels like there's this like, I don't know, sharp binary in the Venus Mars story, like someone's caught in a net and someone's taken
Mm-hmm.
down. But even thinking about this eclipse, it's like the both and of Sekhmet, right? There is
Yeah.
the extreme, but then within that there of the sun itself, but then there is also this sort of like, maybe there is more of the sun and moon having this sort of unity moment, right? Like
Yeah.
both sides being in Sekhmet, if that makes sense in any way.
Yeah. I think like I mean, one thing I've thought about recently with this eclipse is, we did just have a plague. We're still having a plague. Like, I am actually experiencing a plague, or maybe not. I tested negative this morning, but there was a literal plague in my body, um, and certainly
Mhm.
COVID represents um, a turning point
Yeah.
in world history. I mean, just like um, the bubonic plague or other major plagues in world history. Um, and the fact that Sekhmet both brings and alleviates plague
Um,
seems important to me. And also, what I love about that myth um, is there is sort of an overlap with the Greek, um, the idea of like too much heat and fire
yeah.
that being dissipated by this, by beer, by Dionysus, by revelry,
Yeah.
and by sleep. Right?
Mm.
She gets really drunk and she falls asleep. And the way that they celebrated
Yeah.
the festival of Sekhmet, we're told, um, is by days of extreme drunkenness and fucking and fornication. Like, later observers are a little bit horrified. It's like they all get really drunk and they just have sex everywhere openly, anybody everywhere, all different types of sex. um and so we're seeing this, like, one could maybe even make the case, and I'm not saying this is, the scholar in me is like, well, I don't know, we'd have to really look into that. But it hello, right? Like, those are the same remediations that we find in the Orphic hymn, right? When you have too much fire energy, what are good ways to burn it? Go get get wasted. you know, do some vigorous sexual activity and go to sleep. Like the moon.
I love
Yeah.
that so much. Also, too, just the idea like everyone's like, "Oh, it's the eclipse. I'm so sleepy." It's like go to
Mhm.
bed. Just all of you go
Yeah.
to bed. You're
Just
too
go
much.
to
You've done too
bed.
much.
Yeah, yeah, like, just moon to take a clue from the moon,
Oh my
tuck
god.
yourself in. Yeah.
That is a perfect way to end this because I'm so sneaky. I got you to
I
talk
know.
longer. You're like, "I
I
can talk for a half
know.
hour," and I'm just like,
Well, I knew that if I said a half hour, then we really would be an hour. So you're sneaky and I'm sneaky.
I'm just happy you're feeling well. I know that,
Yeah.
you've been through a time, and do you have anything coming up that we can talk about for the good people
Yeah,
here?
actually, I am on Wednesday. Drew Levanti and I are recording an episode of the astrology podcast with Chris Brennan. So I don't have an air date for that yet, but you can
Okay.
be on the lookout for that. That's going to be on Orphism and astrology.
Okay.
Um, and
Super
I
excited.
have,
I'm
yeah,
this
I
is
am
like
too.
okay, really excited for that.
um, I have my Substack, which is mysteriamundi.substack.com. Um, and that's where I release new translations of the Orphic hymns and do little podcasts. Basically, because I have chronic illness, I sort of, whatever I have the energy to do, I put up there. Um, and sometimes that's little snippets of audio, and sometimes it's more longer essays and translations. Um, And then coming soon, in, I think, probably late April, early May, Drew Levante and I will be starting another version of our Star Orphic initiation class. So you can also go, yeah, just keep your ears out for that. If you're on my mailing list, you'll definitely get information about that.
And I will make it a point to talk to you again before, hopefully before that. That would be wonderful. That would be terrific. I'm just going to keep
Yeah.
harassing you because I've been actually really have so much I want to talk to you about. Yeah. So Mysteria Mundi, one of my favorite Substacks. I love it when you leave the voice snippets.
Oh,
They're just, they feel so intimate and informative at the same time. And yeah, I'm Vivi Henriette. My main project is Art of the Zodiac. Talk. We've done interviews together. So you can also go subscribe to my Substack, find we did the Fates in long COVID. We've done things on the Orphic. So and now this will live there too.
yeah.
So everyone do that. And this time slot I have with my astro pal KristaLyn. We do Ask Me Astros, so we answer your astrology questions. But KristaLyn is out chasing the eclipse, so we are here together, and it's been wonderful. Thank you so much to everyone who's joined, because there were people. This is very exciting.
Yeah, thank you. I
Spencer,
can't
you're
see
still here.
that through this.
Oh, you
so,
can't.
Yeah, I can't
Okay.
see the chat. So, just hi everybody, and thank you,
Devin, Spencer, Mortal and Wild, if you're still here, thank you so much. I think now I'm just giving shout outs. Interruptions, if you're still here. Wonderful friend Cameron. We're doing a really awesome workshop together. Hello, Elaine. So there have been people. This has been wonderful. And
yeah,
have a gorgeous day. And
thank
I don't
you.
know, sending love to the eclipse.
Yeah. Take care. Bye,
Bye.
everyone.